Hello. I remember the day it all fell apart as if it were yesterday. I had always thought my marriage to Emily was stable, that we had a bond that couldn't easily be broken. We had been married for 10 years, built a life together that seemed solid. Our routines, our laughter, our quiet moments. I never thought I'd have to question any of it. But that illusion shattered in a single moment, in a single conversation that flipped my world upside down. It was a Sunday morning, one of those lazy days when we didn't have any plans. I had just come back from my usual morning run, feeling good, my body relaxed and my mind clear. I walked through the front door and heard Emily in the kitchen, humming a tune while she prepared breakfast. I smiled to myself, loving the simple, familiar scene of her at the stove, the smell of fresh coffee in the air. I walked over and wrapped my arms around her waist, kissing her cheek. "Morning, babe," I said, my voice light, feeling that warm sense of comfort I always felt when I was around her. She tensed slightly in my arms, her smile faltering. "Hey, David," she said softly, her voice strained. I pulled away, frowning as I looked at her. Something was off. Her eyes wouldn't meet mine. Her shoulders were hunched, as if she were trying to hide from me. "Are you okay?" I asked, my voice filled with concern. She nodded quickly, her hands trembling as she set down the spatula. "Yeah, I'm fine. Just tired, I guess." I could tell she was lying. I knew her well enough to know when something was bothering her. I reached out, gently touching her arm. "Emily, what's going on?" I asked softly. "Talk to me." She took a deep breath, her eyes finally meeting mine, and I saw the fear in them, the tears that were already starting to well up. My stomach tightened, a sense of dread washing over me. I knew in that moment that whatever she was about to say was going to change everything. "David, I need to tell you something," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Something that I've been keeping from you." My heart sank, my hands trembling as I pulled away from her. "What is it?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. She looked down, her tears spilling over, her face filled with regret. I've been seeing someone else," she said, her voice cracking. "I've been having an affair." The words hit me like a punch to the gut, the air knocked out of me. I stared at her, my mind reeling, unable to process what she had just said. "What?" I whispered, my voice trembling. You've been cheating on me?" She nodded, her tears falling faster, her shoulders slumping. "I'm so sorry, David," she whispered. "I never meant for it to happen. I never meant to hurt you." I took a step back, my chest tightening, my heart pounding. "How long?" I asked, my voice filled with pain. "How long has this been going on?" She hesitated, her eyes filled with guilt. "6 months," she whispered, her voice barely audible. I felt like the ground had been ripped out from under me. 6 months. For 6 months, she had been lying to me, betraying me. Everything we had built, everything I thought I knew about our marriage, felt like a lie. "Who is he?" I asked, my voice rising, the anger bubbling up inside me. "Who have you been seeing?" She looked down, her tears falling faster, her hands trembling. "His name is Alex," she whispered. He's someone I met at work." I felt my stomach turn, the pain overwhelming. "At work," I repeated, my voice filled with disbelief. "You've been seeing someone from work? How could you do this to me, Emily? How could you betray me like this?" She looked up at me, her eyes filled with pain, her face twisted with regret. "I don't know," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I was feeling lonely, disconnected. I felt like you didn't love me anymore, like you didn't care about me, and Alex was there. He made me feel seen, like I mattered." I shook my head, my hands trembling, my heart breaking. "You think I don't love you?" I asked, my voice cracking. "I've always loved you, Emily. I've always been here for you. How could you say that?" She took a deep breath, her tears spilling over, her shoulders trembling. "I know you love me, David," she whispered, "but I felt like you were distant, like you weren't really here. I know it's not an excuse, and I know I've made a terrible mistake, but I was lost. I stared at her, my heart pounding, the weight of her words pressing down on me. I wanted to scream, to shout, to tell her how much she had hurt me, how much she had destroyed everything we had built together. But all I could feel was the pain, the deep, gut-wrenching pain of betrayal. I need you to leave, I said finally, my voice barely above a whisper. I can't be around you right now. She nodded, her tears falling faster, her face filled with despair. I understand, she whispered, her voice trembling. I'll go. But please, David, just know that I'm so sorry. I love you, and I never wanted to hurt you. I turned away from her, my heart breaking, the weight of her words pressing down on me. I didn't know what to do, didn't know if I could ever forgive her, if I could ever look at her the same way again. The woman I had loved, the woman I thought I knew, had betrayed me in the worst possible way, and I didn't know if we could ever come back from that. As I heard her leave, the door closing softly behind her, I sank down onto the couch, my head in my hands. I felt like my entire world had come crashing down around me, like everything I had believed in had been ripped away, and I didn't know if I would ever be able to pick up the pieces. The days after Emily's confession were a blur of pain, anger, and confusion. I tried to distract myself with work, with anything that would take my mind off what had happened, but it was impossible. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw her face, heard her voice telling me about Alex. The betrayal was all-consuming, and I didn't know if I would ever be able to move past it. Emily had moved out to stay with her sister, giving me space to process everything. I knew I needed time to think, to decide what I wanted, but the truth was that I had no idea. Part of me wanted to fight for our marriage, to try to rebuild what had been broken. But another part of me, the part that was still drowning in pain, wanted nothing to do with her. I couldn't understand how she could do this, how she could destroy everything we had built together for someone else. A week after she left, Emily called me. Her voice was shaky, and I could hear the hesitation in her tone as she spoke. David, I need to talk to you, she said softly. There's something else I need to tell you. Can we meet in person? My stomach tightened, dread washing over me. What else could there be? What more could she possibly have to say? But despite everything, I agreed. I needed answers, needed to understand how we had ended up here, and maybe even why she had chosen to betray me. We agreed to meet at a small cafe near our house. As I walked in, I saw her sitting at a table in the back, her hands clasped in front of her, her eyes red from crying. She looked up when she saw me, her face filled with a mixture of hope and fear. Thank you for coming, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I nodded, sitting down across from her, my heart pounding. What do you need to tell me? I asked, my voice cold. She took a deep breath, her hands trembling as she wiped at her tears. David, I've been thinking a lot about everything, about why I did what I did, and there's something I need to be honest about, she said softly, her voice cracking. I frowned, my chest tightening. What is it? I asked, my voice filled with suspicion. She looked down, her tears spilling over, her face filled with regret. It wasn't just about feeling lonely or disconnected, she whispered, her voice trembling. There's more to it than that. Alex. He wasn't who I thought he was. I felt a jolt of confusion, my heart pounding as I tried to make sense of her words. What do you mean? I asked, my voice rising. Who is he? Emily took another deep breath, her eyes welling up with tears. I thought he cared about me, that he understood me, but it turns out he had his own agenda, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. He knew things about us, David, things he shouldn't have known. I stared at her, my stomach turning, a sense of dread settling in my chest. What kind of things? I asked, my voice filled with fear. She looked up at me, her eyes filled with guilt. He knew about your job, about our finances, about our life, she whispered. He knew things that I never told him, and I started to realize he was using me. He wasn't interested in me. He was interested in what he could get from me. My mind reeled, my heart pounding as I tried to process her words. What are you saying, Emily? I asked, my voice trembling. Are you saying he was after something from us? She nodded, her tears falling faster, her face twisted with regret. I think he was using me to get to you, she whispered. He knew you worked in finance, that you had access to sensitive information. He started asking questions, trying to get me to tell him things about your job, about your clients. At first, I didn't think much of it. I thought he was just curious. But then, it started to feel wrong. I felt a chill run down my spine, my hands trembling as I stared at her. Are you saying he was trying to use you to get information about my job? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Emily, do you have any idea how serious this is? She nodded, her tears spilling over, her face filled with fear. I know, David. I know I made a terrible mistake, and I'm so sorry. I should have seen it sooner, but I was blinded by everything he was saying, by the way he made me feel. I never meant for it to get this far. I shook my head, my heart pounding, the weight of her words pressing down on me. I felt a mix of emotions: anger, betrayal, fear. This wasn't just about her cheating anymore. This was something much bigger, something that could have serious consequences for both of us. Did you tell him anything? I asked, my voice filled with urgency. Did you give him any information? She shook her head quickly, her eyes wide with fear. No, she whispered. I swear, I didn't tell him anything. When I started to realize what he was doing, I cut things off. I told him I couldn't see him anymore. But I'm scared, David. I'm scared of what he might do. I took a deep breath, my mind racing. This wasn't just about our marriage anymore. This was about our safety, about protecting ourselves from someone who had manipulated Emily for his own gain. I felt a surge of anger, not just at her, but at Alex, at the man who had preyed on her vulnerabilities and tried to use her to get to me. We need to go to the police, I said finally, my voice trembling. We need to tell them everything about what he asked you, about what he might be after. We can't let this go, Emily. This is serious. She nodded, her tears spilling over, her face filled with a mixture of fear and regret. I know, she whispered. I'll do whatever it takes to make this right, David. I'm so sorry for everything. I never meant for any of this to happen. I stared at her, my heart aching, the weight of everything pressing down on me. I didn't know if I could ever forgive her for what she had done, for the lies she had told, but I knew that we needed to deal with this together. This was bigger than our marriage. This was about our safety, our lives. As we left the cafe, I felt a sense of determination settle in my chest. I didn't know what the future held for us, didn't know if we could ever rebuild what had been broken, but I knew one thing for certain. I wasn't going to let Alex get away with what he had done. He had taken advantage of Emily, tried to use her to get to me, and I wasn't going to let him win. I didn't know if this was the beginning of the end for Emily and me, or if it was the start of something new, something that could help us find our way back to each other. But for now, we had a fight ahead of us, and we were going to face it together. After our meeting at the cafe, the reality of the situation hit me like a ton of bricks. This wasn't just about my wife having an affair. It was about someone trying to manipulate their way into our lives, our privacy, and my job. Emily's actions had thrown us into a situation far bigger than just a marital crisis, and I had no choice but to face it head-on. As much as I was hurt by her betrayal, the danger we faced now was something neither of us could ignore. We agreed to report everything to the police. Emily was nervous, her hands trembling as she dialed the number to arrange a meeting. I could see the fear in her eyes, the guilt she carried for letting herself be pulled into something that had spiraled out of control. Despite everything, a part of me still cared about her. I didn't want her to carry this burden alone, and as much as it hurt, I knew I had to stand by her through this ordeal. The following day, we went to the police station. I could feel Emily's tension as we sat in the waiting room, the silence between us filled with unspoken emotions. When an officer finally called us in, we explained everything: how Alex had entered our lives, the affair, and the questions he had asked about my job and my clients. The officer listened intently, taking notes, and as I spoke, I felt a surge of anger at the thought of how calculated Alex's actions had been. He had targeted Emily at her most vulnerable, using her to try to get to me, and it made my blood boil. After we had finished explaining, the officer nodded, his expression serious. We'll need to investigate this further. If what you're saying is true, then Alex could be involved in something far more serious, possibly even corporate espionage. We're going to need as much information as you can provide. I glanced at Emily, her face pale, her eyes filled with fear. I reached for her hand, giving it a gentle squeeze. We'll help in any way we can, I said, my voice filled with determination. We just want to make sure he can't hurt us, or anyone else, again. As we left the station, Emily looked at me, her eyes welling up with tears. David, I'm so sorry, she whispered, her voice barely audible. I never meant for any of this to happen. I was stupid, and I let myself get pulled into something I didn't understand. I know I've hurt you, and I don't expect you to forgive me, but I just want you to know how truly sorry I am. I took a deep breath, my heart aching, the weight of her words pressing down on me. I know you're sorry, Emily, I said softly, and I appreciate that. But it's not just about the affair anymore, it's about everything that's happened because of it. We're in danger, and we need to focus on getting through this. We can deal with us later, but right now we need to protect ourselves. She nodded, her tears spilling over, her face filled with regret. I understand, she whispered. I'm just so scared, David. I don't know what he's capable of, and I'm afraid of what might happen next. I looked at her, my heart pounding, the fear settling in my chest. I didn't have any answers, and I was just as scared as she was. But I knew that we couldn't let Alex win. He had tried to tear us apart, tried to use us for his own gain, and I wasn't going to let him get away with it. Over the next few days, the police began their investigation, and Emily and I tried to get back to some semblance of normalcy. It was awkward having her back at home, and the tension between us was almost unbearable at times. I couldn't look at her without feeling the sting of betrayal, without seeing her with Alex. But at the same time, I couldn't deny that a part of me still loved her. Despite everything, she was still my wife, still the woman I had built my life with, and that made everything even more confusing. One evening, after a long day at work, I came home to find Emily sitting on the couch, a glass of wine in her hand. She looked up at me, her eyes filled with a mixture of hope and fear. Can we talk? She asked softly, her voice trembling. I sighed, setting my bag down, my heart heavy. Sure, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. She took a deep breath, her hands trembling as she set the glass down on the table. David, I know things are different now, and I know I've hurt you in ways I can't take back. But I need you to know that I want to make things right. I'm willing to do whatever it takes to rebuild your trust, to show you that I still love you, that I've always loved you. I looked at her, my heart aching, the pain still raw. It's not that simple, Emily, I said softly, my voice cracking. I want to believe you, I really do, but I don't know if I can. You lied to me for months, you betrayed me, and you put us both in danger. How am I supposed to just move past that? She nodded, her tears spilling over, her shoulders slumping. I know, she whispered, her voice breaking. I know I've done things that are unforgivable, but I'm willing to fight for us. David, I'm willing to do whatever it takes, no matter how long it takes. I love you, and I want to be the person you deserve. I took a deep breath, my chest tightening, the weight of her words pressing down on me. I wanted to believe her, wanted to believe that there was still hope for us, but I didn't know if I could. The trust that had once been the foundation of our marriage had been shattered, and I didn't know if it could ever be rebuilt. I need time, I said finally, my voice barely above a whisper. I need time to figure out if this is something I can live with, if I can ever truly move past it. She nodded, her tears falling faster, her face filled with a mixture of hope and despair. I understand, she whispered. I'll give you all the time you need. Just please, don't give up on us. I turned and walked to the kitchen, my heart heavy, the pain overwhelming. I didn't know what the future held for us, didn't know if we could ever find our way back to each other. But I knew one thing for sure. I needed to protect myself from the storm that had been unleashed. and I needed to figure out if the love I still felt for Emily was enough to overcome the betrayal that had torn us apart. 2 days later, I got a call from the police. They had found Alex and brought him in for questioning. My heart pounded as I listened to the officer's words, the weight of everything pressing down on me. They told me they would need me and Emily to come down to the station, that Alex had been cooperative but had some information he wanted to share with us. When we arrived at the station, my stomach twisted in knots. We were escorted to a small room where Alex sat, his eyes downcast, his demeanor completely different from what I had imagined. He looked up when we entered, his eyes meeting mine for a moment before he looked away. "Thank you for coming," he said softly, his voice filled with something that almost resembled remorse. I clenched my fists, the anger bubbling up inside me. "What do you want?" I asked, my voice trembling. Alex took a deep breath, his eyes meeting mine again. "I need to tell you the truth," he said, "about why I got involved with Emily. It wasn't supposed to go this far." Emily looked at him, her face pale, her hands trembling. "What do you mean?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. Alex hesitated, his eyes filled with regret. "I was hired," he said finally, his voice cracking. "I was hired to get close to you, Emily, to find out information about David, about his job. I didn't mean for it to go this far, but I got in too deep." My heart pounded, my mind reeling. "Hired," I repeated, my voice filled with disbelief. "By who?" Alex swallowed hard, his eyes filled with fear. "A competitor," he said. "They wanted to find out about your clients, about the deals you were making. They thought if they could get me close to Emily, I could get to you. But I swear, I never wanted it to go this far. I never wanted to hurt either of you." I felt the world crumble around me, the weight of his words pressing down on me like a ton of bricks. This wasn't just about an affair. It was about betrayal on a level I hadn't even imagined. Someone had deliberately targeted us, used Emily's vulnerabilities to try to get to me, and it made me sick to my stomach. Emily turned to me, her tears spilling over, her face twisted with pain. "David, I'm so sorry," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I had no idea. I was so stupid, and I let myself get pulled into something I didn't understand. I never wanted any of this to happen." I looked at her, my heart aching, the pain overwhelming. I didn't know what to say, didn't know how to process everything that had just been revealed. All I knew was that the life I thought I had, the marriage I thought I knew, had been shattered in ways I never could have imagined. Leaving the police station, I felt like I was in a daze. The world around me felt unreal, the ground beneath my feet unstable. I couldn't wrap my mind around the idea that my wife, the woman I had shared a decade of my life with, had been manipulated into a relationship that was nothing more than a calculated betrayal. And not just any betrayal. It was one that involved my career, my security, my livelihood. It was as if someone had taken everything I held dear and shattered it right in front of me. As we walked to the car, Emily kept glancing at me, her eyes filled with tears, her face etched with fear. I could tell she wanted to say something, but I couldn't bring myself to look at her. My emotions were too raw. Anger, hurt, confusion all swirling around inside me, fighting for dominance. "David," she began, her voice trembling. I shook my head, holding up a hand to stop her. "Not now, Emily," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "I need time. I can't deal with this right now." She nodded, her tears spilling over, her face filled with regret. "I understand," she whispered, her voice cracking. "I'll give you whatever time you need. I just want you to know how truly sorry I am." I opened the car door and got inside, my heart pounding, my chest tight. Emily climbed into the passenger seat, her eyes fixed on her lap, her hands trembling as she wiped at her tears. The drive home was silent, the tension between us almost suffocating. I wanted to scream, to lash out, to make sense of everything that had happened, but I knew that nothing I said or did would change the reality of what had unfolded. The damage had been done, and now all I could do was try to figure out what came next. When we got home, I went straight to the bedroom, closing the door behind me. I needed space to think, to process everything that had been revealed. I sat down on the edge of the bed, my head in my hands, my heart aching. The woman I loved, the woman I had trusted more than anyone else in the world, had been used as a pawn in someone else's game. And she had let it happen. Whether or not she knew the full extent of what Alex was doing, she had still betrayed me, still chosen to let him into our lives. A few hours later, there was a soft knock on the door. David. Emily's voice was barely audible, filled with hesitation. Can we talk? I sighed, my heart heavy, the weight of her request pressing down on me. I didn't know if I was ready to face her, but I also knew that we couldn't keep avoiding each other. If we were ever going to find a way forward, whatever that looked like, we needed to talk. Come in, I said finally, my voice trembling. The door opened slowly, and Emily stepped inside, her eyes red from crying, her face pale. She walked over to the bed, her hands trembling as she sat down beside me. For a moment, neither of us spoke, the silence between us filled with all the things that had gone unsaid. I don't know where to start, she whispered, her voice breaking. I know I've hurt you in ways I can't ever take back, and I know I've destroyed the trust we had. But I need you to know that I never wanted any of this. I was so stupid, and I let myself get pulled into something I didn't understand. I thought Alex cared about me, that he understood me, but it was all a lie. I looked at her, my heart aching, the pain still raw. How could you let this happen, Emily? I asked, my voice trembling. How could you let him into our lives, into our marriage? How could you put everything we've built at risk? She shook her head, her tears falling faster, her face filled with regret. I don't know, she whispered, her voice cracking. I was feeling lost, disconnected. I felt like you didn't love me anymore, like you were distant. And Alex, he made me feel seen. He made me feel like I mattered. I know that's not an excuse, and I know I made terrible choices, but I was so lost. I clenched my fists, my heart pounding, the weight of her words pressing down on me. You think I didn't love you? I asked, my voice filled with disbelief. Emily, I've always loved you. I've always been here for you. How could you think that I didn't care? She looked down, her tears spilling over, her shoulders slumping. I don't know, she whispered. I let myself believe things that weren't true, and I made choices that hurt you, that hurt us. I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I want to make things right. I want to fight for us, for our marriage. I stared at her, my heart heavy, the pain overwhelming. I wanted to believe her, wanted to believe that there was still something worth fighting for, but I didn't know if I could. The trust that had once been the foundation of our marriage had been shattered, and I didn't know if it could ever be rebuilt. I don't know if I can forgive you, Emily, I said finally, my voice barely above a whisper. I don't know if I can ever look at you the same way again. Every time I look at you, all I see is him. All I see is the betrayal. She nodded, her tears falling faster, her face filled with a mixture of hope and despair. I understand, she whispered, her voice trembling. I know it's going to take time, and I know I have to earn your trust again, but I'm willing to do whatever it takes. David, I love you, and I want to be the person you deserve. I took a deep breath, my heart aching, the weight of her words pressing down on me. I need time, I said softly, my voice cracking. I need time to figure out if this is something I can live with, if I can ever truly move past it. She nodded, her tears spilling over, her face filled with regret. I'll give you all the time you need, she whispered. I hope that one day you'll see that I'm trying, that I want to be better for you, for us. The days that followed were filled with a strange tension. Emily and I were both trying to find a way forward, but it was hard. The pain of her betrayal was still fresh, the memories of everything that had happened still haunting me. I couldn't look at her without feeling the sting of what she had done, without seeing the way she had let someone else into our lives, into our marriage. But at the same time, I could see that she was trying. She was different, more open, more willing to confront her mistakes. She was vulnerable in a way she hadn't been before, and as much as it hurt, I couldn't deny that a part of me still cared about her, still wanted to believe that there was hope for us. One evening, as we sat on the couch, the silence between us almost unbearable, Emily turned to me, her eyes filled with tears. "David," she said softly, her voice barely above a whisper, "can I ask you something?" I looked at her, my heart pounding, the weight of her question pressing down on me. "What is it?" I asked, my voice trembling. She took a deep breath, her hands trembling as she wiped at her tears. "Do you think there's still hope for us?" she whispered, her voice cracking. "Do you think we can ever get back to what we had?" I stared at her, my heart aching, the pain still raw. I didn't know if we could ever get back to what we had before. Didn't know if the love we once shared was enough to overcome the betrayal that had torn us apart. But I also knew that I wasn't ready to give up, that I still wanted to try. "I don't know, Emily," I said finally, my voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know if we can ever be the same, but I'm willing to try. One day at a time. That's all I can give you right now." Her tears spilled over, her face filled with a mixture of hope and sadness. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice breaking. "That's all I want. One day at a time." As I looked at her, my heart heavy, the weight of everything pressing down on me, I realized that the road ahead was still uncertain. There were still wounds that needed to heal, still trust that needed to be rebuilt. But for now, we were both willing to try, and maybe that was enough. The next few weeks were a strange mix of progress and setbacks. Emily and I were trying to move forward, both in our relationship and in dealing with the fallout from Alex's deception. But it was far from easy. The pain of her betrayal still lingered between us, like a shadow that wouldn't go away. But there were also moments of hope. She was doing everything she could to show me that she was committed to rebuilding what had been broken. She attended therapy sessions on her own, was more open with me, and tried to involve me in her day-to-day life in a way she hadn't before. But even with all of that, the trust that had once existed between us felt fragile, like it could break at any moment. One day, while I was at work, I received an unexpected email from an unknown address. I almost ignored it, thinking it was just spam, but something in the subject line caught my eye. It simply read, "For your eyes only, information about Emily and Alex." My heart pounded as I opened the message, my stomach churning with a sense of dread. The email was short, but what it contained made my blood run cold. There were attachments, screenshots of messages between Emily and Alex, conversations I had never seen before. As I read through them, my heart sank. It wasn't just the flirtatious messages that hurt. It was the clear, deliberate manipulation on Alex's part, and Emily's responses that were filled with far more vulnerability than she had admitted. There were messages that suggested a much deeper involvement than Emily had let on, including plans to meet multiple times, and even discussions about my job. One particular message stood out. It was from Alex to Emily, dated just weeks before she ended the affair. "You know, the only way we're going to get what we want is if you can get David to give you access to his work files. Just think about how easy it would be if you could get him to trust you enough to let you in. You said it yourself, he's distant, he's distracted. Use that. We can make this work together." My hands were shaking as I read it, my heart pounding in my chest. I felt sick, my stomach twisting with a mix of anger and disbelief. Emily had told me that she had never given Alex any information about my job, but this message suggested that she had at least entertained the idea, that she had been complicit in his plan, even if she hadn't followed through. I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself, my mind racing with everything I had just read. I knew I needed answers, needed to confront Emily about what I had found. I couldn't keep pretending that everything was okay, that we were on the path to healing, when there were still so many secrets between us. That evening, when I got home, Emily was in the kitchen, cooking dinner. She looked up when she saw me, her face lighting up with a smile. "Hey, how was work?" she asked, her voice light, but I could hear the tension beneath it, the uncertainty that had become a constant presence in our lives. I didn't answer her question. Instead, I set my bag down on the counter, my heart pounding as I looked at her. "We need to talk," I said, my voice trembling. She frowned, her eyes filled with concern. "What's wrong?" she asked, her hands stilling as she turned to face me. I took a deep breath, my hands trembling as I pulled out my phone and opened the email. I handed it to her, my chest tight. "I got this today," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "Someone sent it to me, screenshots of your messages with Alex. Messages I've never seen before." Emily's face went pale, her eyes widening in shock. She took the phone from me, her hands trembling as she looked at the screen. As she read the messages, her tears began to fall, her face filled with a mix of fear and regret. "David, I don't know what to say," she whispered, her voice cracking. "I never wanted you to see those. I thought I had deleted everything." I stared at her, my heart aching, the pain overwhelming. "Why didn't you tell me the truth?" I asked, my voice trembling. "You said you never gave him any information about my job, but these messages make it clear that you were at least thinking about it. You were considering betraying me, not just as your husband, but in my career." She shook her head, her tears spilling over, her face filled with despair. "I never gave him anything, David. I swear. I was stupid, and I let myself get pulled into something I didn't understand. He manipulated me, made me feel like I had to prove myself to him. But I never went through with it. I couldn't do that to you." I took a deep breath, my heart pounding, the weight of her words pressing down on me. "But you thought about it?" I said softly, my voice cracking. "You let him convince you that it was okay to use me, to betray me. How am I supposed to move past that, Emily? How am I supposed to ever trust you again?" She looked down, her tears falling faster, her shoulders slumping. "I know," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I know I made terrible choices, and I know I've hurt you in ways I can never take back. But I love you, David. I love you, and I want to be better. I want to make things right if you'll let me." I shook my head, my heart aching, the pain still raw. "I don't know if I can do this, Emily," I said finally, my voice trembling. "I don't know if I can ever look at you without seeing all of this, without seeing the lies, the betrayal, the way you let him manipulate you." She nodded, her tears spilling over, her face filled with a mixture of hope and despair. "I understand," she whispered, "and I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I'm willing to fight for us, David. I'm willing to do whatever it takes, no matter how long it takes." I turned away from her, my heart heavy, the weight of everything pressing down on me. I didn't know if we could ever find our way back to each other. Didn't know if the love we once shared was enough to overcome everything that had happened. But I also knew that a part of me still wanted to try, still wanted to believe that there was hope for us, even if it was buried beneath all the pain. Over the next few days, I found myself going over the messages again and again, trying to understand how we had gotten to this point. I knew that Alex had manipulated Emily, had taken advantage of her vulnerabilities, but I couldn't help but feel betrayed by her willingness to go along with it, even if she hadn't followed through. It made me question everything about our marriage, everything I thought I knew about her. One evening, I decided to confront Emily again. I couldn't keep carrying this weight on my own. I needed answers, needed to understand why she had let things go so far. "Emily," I said softly as we sat on the couch, the tension between us thick. "I need to know why. Why did you let him in? Why did you even consider betraying me like that?" She looked at me, her eyes filled with tears, her face etched with pain. "I don't know if I can explain it in a way that makes sense," she whispered, her voice trembling. "I was feeling so lost, so disconnected. I felt like you didn't love me anymore, like I was invisible. And when Alex came along, he made me feel seen. He made me feel like I mattered, like I was important. I know that doesn't excuse anything, but it's the truth." I stared at her, my heart aching, the weight of her words pressing down on me. I wanted to understand, wanted to find a way to move past the pain, but it was hard. The betrayal was too deep, the trust too broken. "I need time, Emily," I said finally, my voice barely above a whisper. "I need time to figure out if I can ever truly forgive you, if I can ever look at you without seeing all of this." She nodded, her tears spilling over, her face filled with regret. I'll give you all the time you need, she whispered. I just hope that one day, you'll see that I'm trying, that I want to be better. For you, for us. As I looked at her, my heart heavy, I realized that the road ahead was still uncertain. There were still wounds that needed to heal, still questions that needed answers. But for now, all I could do was take it one day at a time, and hope that somewhere down the line, we could find a way back to each other. As much as I tried to focus on my work and push the thoughts of betrayal and manipulation aside, I found myself struggling to keep my mind clear. Emily's involvement with Alex, and the fact that she had even considered betraying me in my career, kept gnawing at me. Despite everything, there were still so many unanswered questions, still so much I didn't understand. It felt like I was living in a constant state of confusion, unsure of what was real and what wasn't. I decided to take a break from everything to clear my head. One Friday afternoon, I left work early and drove to a bar I used to visit with some friends from college. It was a small, out-of-the-way place that wasn't too crowded, and I hoped it would give me the chance to just sit, relax, and drown out my thoughts for a while. As I sat down at the bar, I ordered a drink, letting out a heavy sigh as I tried to relax. The bartender handed me my drink, and I took a sip, my mind still racing with thoughts of everything that had happened. I was so lost in my thoughts that I didn't even notice someone sit down next to me until I heard a voice that sent a chill down my spine. Well, David, right? A familiar voice said, dripping with sarcasm. I turned, my heart pounding, and found myself face to face with Alex. He had a smug grin on his face, his eyes filled with a mixture of arrogance and something that almost resembled pity. What the hell are you doing here? I demanded, my voice trembling with anger. Haven't you done enough already? Alex chuckled, taking a sip of his drink. Relax, man. I'm just here to have a drink. Same as you. But since we're both here, I figured we might as well talk. I clenched my fists, the anger bubbling up inside me. The last thing I wanted was to be anywhere near Alex, let alone talk to him. But at the same time, a part of me couldn't help but want answers. Answers that Emily couldn't give me. What do you want? I asked, my voice filled with bitterness. He shrugged, his grin widening. I just thought you might want to hear my side of the story, you know, since Emily's probably only told you what makes her look good. I frowned, my stomach twisting with a mix of anger and curiosity. What are you talking about? I asked, my voice trembling. Alex took another sip of his drink, his eyes never leaving mine. Look, I'll be honest with you, David. Emily came to me. She was the one who made the first move. She was the one who wanted more than just a friendship. My heart pounded, my mind reeling. You're lying, I said, my voice cracking. She told me you manipulated her, that you took advantage of her vulnerabilities. He laughed, shaking his head. Of course she did. She's trying to save herself, trying to make herself look like the victim. But the truth is, she wanted this. She wanted the excitement, the danger. She was tired of you, tired of the routine, tired of feeling ignored. I just gave her what she wanted. I stared at him, my heart aching, the weight of his words pressing down on me. I didn't want to believe him, didn't want to believe that Emily had been the one to initiate the affair, that she had been the one to bring him into our lives. But a part of me couldn't help but wonder if there was some truth to what he was saying. Emily had admitted to feeling disconnected, to feeling like I didn't love her anymore. Was it possible that she had sought out Alex, that she had been the one to cross that line? You're lying? I repeated, my voice barely above a whisper. She wouldn't do that. Alex shrugged, his smile widening. Believe whatever you want, David. But I think deep down you know the truth. She was looking for something that you weren't giving her, and she found it with me. I clenched my jaw, my hands trembling as I struggled to keep my emotions in check. I wanted to punch him, to wipe that smug grin off his face, but I knew that wouldn't solve anything. It wouldn't change what had happened, wouldn't change the fact that my wife had betrayed me, that she had let this man into our lives. Why did you do it? I asked finally, my voice filled with pain. Why did you go after her? Was it just to get to me? Or was there more to it? He looked at me, his expression softening for a moment. Honestly, he said, his voice lowering. At first, it was about the job. I was hired to get close to her, to see if I could get any information about you. But somewhere along the way, it got more complicated. She was vulnerable and I took advantage of that. I'm not proud of it, but it's the truth. I took a deep breath, my chest tightening, the weight of his words pressing down on me. I wanted to hate him, wanted to see him as nothing more than a villain. But the truth was that this wasn't just about him. Emily had made her own choices, and those choices had led us to where we were now. You ruined everything, I said softly, my voice trembling. You took advantage of her, manipulated her, and now everything is destroyed. He nodded, his expression turning serious. I know, and I'm sorry, David. I really am. I never meant for it to go this far. I never meant for anyone to get hurt. I stared at him, my heart aching, the pain overwhelming. It's too late for apologies, I said finally, my voice barely above a whisper. You've done enough damage. Alex nodded, his eyes filled with regret. I know, and I hope, for what it's worth, that you can find a way to move past this. That you and Emily can find a way to heal. I didn't say anything, my heart heavy as I turned away from him, my mind racing with everything he had said. I didn't know if I could ever forgive Emily. Didn't know if I could ever look at her without seeing the betrayal, without seeing Alex. But I knew one thing for sure. I needed to find a way to move forward, with or without her. When I got home that night, Emily was waiting for me, her eyes filled with worry. Where have you been? She asked, her voice trembling. I was so worried. I took a deep breath, my heart pounding as I looked at her. I saw Alex, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. He told me everything. He said you were the one who initiated the affair. Is that true? Her eyes widened, her face going pale, her hands trembling. David, she began, her voice breaking. Just tell me the truth, Emily? I said, my voice filled with pain. No more lies. I need to know. She took a deep breath, her tears spilling over, her face filled with regret. Yes, she whispered, her voice barely audible. I was the one who made the first move. I was feeling so lost, so disconnected, and I thought he could fill the void. But I was wrong, David. I was so wrong, and I'm so sorry. I stared at her, my heart aching, the weight of her confession pressing down on me. I didn't know what to say, didn't know how to process everything that had just been revealed. All I knew was that the woman I had loved, the woman I had trusted more than anyone else in the world, had betrayed me in ways I never could have imagined. I need time, I said finally, my voice barely above a whisper. I need time to figure out if I can ever truly forgive you, if I can ever move past this. She nodded, her tears falling faster, her face filled with a mixture of hope and despair. I understand, she whispered, and I'll give you all the time you need. I just hope that one day, you'll see that I'm trying, that I want to be better, for you, for us. As I looked at her, my heart heavy, I realized that the road ahead was still uncertain. There were still wounds that needed to heal, still questions that needed answers. But for now, all I could do was take it one day at a time, and hope that somewhere down the line, we could find a way back to each other. The days that followed were some of the hardest I had ever faced. Emily's confession that she had been the one to initiate the affair was like a dagger to my heart. It had already been hard enough to accept that she had cheated on me, but knowing that she had willingly brought Alex into our lives, knowing she had crossed that line on her own, made it nearly impossible for me to see a way forward. Every time I looked at her, all I could see was the betrayal. All I could think about was how she had let another man into our marriage, both emotionally and physically. We continued to live under the same roof, but the distance between us was palpable. Emily tried to reach out, to show me she was committed to making things right, but I couldn't bring myself to let her in. The wounds were still too fresh, the pain still too overwhelming. I needed time to heal, time to decide if I could ever truly forgive her. One evening, as I sat in the living room, lost in thought, my phone buzzed with a new message. I picked it up, expecting it to be a work email, but what I saw made my stomach turn. It was another message from an unknown number, and it contained a photo of Emily, taken in what looked like Alex's apartment. She was sitting on the couch, smiling, with Alex's arm around her shoulders. Below the photo there was a message. I told you she wanted it. She chose me. You'll never be enough for her. My heart pounded, my hands trembling as I stared at the photo, my chest tightening with a mix of anger and fear. Who was sending me these messages? Was it Alex? Was he trying to taunt me, to get under my skin, to make sure I knew that he had one? Or was it someone else? Someone who had been watching, someone who knew more than they should? I stood up, my head spinning, my heart racing. I couldn't take it anymore. I couldn't keep living like this, constantly haunted by what had happened, constantly reminded of Emily's betrayal. I needed answers, and I needed to put an end to whatever game Alex or whoever was behind this was playing. I walked into the kitchen, where Emily was preparing dinner. She looked up when she saw me, her eyes filled with hope, but her face fell when she saw the expression on mine. "What's wrong?" she asked, her voice trembling. I held up my phone, my hands shaking with anger. "I got another message," I said, my voice filled with bitterness. "A photo of you and Alex. Someone is trying to mess with me, Emily. Someone is trying to make sure I can never move past this." Her eyes widened, her face going pale, her hands trembling as she reached for the phone. She looked at the photo, her tears welling up, her face filled with fear. "David, I swear I didn't know about this," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I have no idea who could be sending you these messages." I clenched my jaw, my chest tightening, the anger bubbling up inside me. "It has to be Alex," I said, my voice trembling. "He's trying to make sure I can never forgive you, trying to make sure that I know he had you. He's not just going to let us move on." She shook her head, her tears spilling over, her face filled with despair. "I ended things with him, David. I told him I didn't want anything to do with him. I thought he would leave us alone." I took a deep breath, my heart pounding, the weight of her words pressing down on me. "We need to go back to the police," I said finally, my voice filled with determination. "We need to report this. Whoever is doing this isn't going to stop until they get what they want." She nodded, her tears falling faster, her face filled with fear. "I'll do whatever it takes," she whispered, her voice trembling. "I just want this to be over. I just want us to have a chance to heal." The next day, we went back to the police station. I showed them the photo and the messages, explaining everything that had happened since the initial report. The officer took notes, his expression serious as he listened to our story. He promised that they would look into it, that they would do everything they could to find out who was behind the messages. After we left the station, Emily and I sat in the car in silence for a long moment. She looked over at me, her eyes filled with tears, her face etched with emotion. "David, I know I've put us in this situation," she said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. "I know that all of this is my fault, and I don't expect you to forgive me, but I need you to know that I'm truly, deeply sorry for everything. I love you, and I just want a chance to make things right." I stared at her, my heart aching, the pain still raw. "I don't know if I can ever forgive you, Emily," I said finally, my voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know if I can ever look at you without seeing all of this." She nodded, her tears spilling over, her face filled with regret. "I understand," she whispered, "but I'm not going to give up on us. I'm going to keep trying, no matter what it takes." The next few days were filled with tension, the fear of what might happen next hanging over us like a dark cloud. I found myself constantly looking over my shoulder, checking my phone, wondering if there would be another message, another reminder of everything that had happened. I couldn't sleep, couldn't focus on work, couldn't do anything without the fear that Alex, or whoever was behind this, was still out there, still trying to tear us apart. One night, as I sat in the living room, staring blankly at the TV, there was a knock at the door. My heart pounded, my chest tightening as I stood up, my hands trembling. Emily looked over at me, her eyes wide with fear. "Who could that be?" she whispered, her voice trembling. I walked to the door, my heart racing, and looked through the peephole. My stomach dropped when I saw who was standing there. Alex. He was standing on our porch, his expression unreadable, his hands shoved in his pockets. I took a deep breath, my hands shaking as I opened the door. What the hell are you doing here? I demanded, my voice filled with anger. Alex looked at me, his eyes filled with something that almost resembled fear. I need to talk to you, David, he said, his voice trembling. It's important. I clenched my jaw, my heart pounding, the anger bubbling up inside me. You've done enough already, I said, my voice trembling. Why can't you just leave us alone? He shook his head, his expression desperate. Please just hear me out, he said, his voice cracking. I'm not the one sending the messages. I swear, it's not me. I think someone else is trying to mess with both of us. I stared at him, my mind reeling, my chest tightening with a mix of fear and confusion. What are you talking about? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Alex took a deep breath, his hands trembling as he pulled out his phone. He held it up, showing me a series of messages. Messages that were almost identical to the ones I had been receiving. Photos of Emily, taunts, threats. I've been getting them too, he said, his voice filled with fear. Someone is playing us, David. Someone wants us to destroy each other. I felt my stomach turn, my heart pounding as I looked at the messages. I didn't know what to think, didn't know if I could believe him, but a part of me knew that he was telling the truth. Someone else was out there. Someone who wanted to make sure that neither of us could move on, that neither of us could find peace. I took a deep breath, my chest tightening, the weight of everything pressing down on me. Who could it be? I asked finally, my voice trembling. Who would want to do this? Alex shook his head, his face filled with fear. I don't know, he whispered, but I think we need to find out. Because whoever it is, they're not going to stop until they get what they want. As I looked at him, my heart pounding, I realized that the nightmare wasn't over. There was still someone out there, still someone who wanted to tear us apart, and if we were ever going to find a way to move forward, we needed to face this together. Alex's revelation that he had also been receiving messages threw everything into chaos. It changed everything I thought I knew about the situation. The idea that there was someone else, some third party pulling the strings, made the entire nightmare feel even more sinister. It wasn't just about Emily's betrayal anymore. It was about someone who was determined to destroy us all. Someone who had been watching, waiting, and manipulating us for their own sick game. The realization left me shaken, but it also forced me to confront something I had been trying to ignore. If we were going to find a way out of this, we had to work together. Me, Emily, and even Alex. We were all being played, and the only way to stop whoever was behind this was to put aside our anger and face it together. Emily was initially hesitant when I told her about Alex's visit. She didn't trust him, didn't trust that he was really on our side. But after I showed her the messages he had received, messages that mirrored the ones sent to me, she knew we had no choice. We needed to put an end to this once and for all. The three of us decided to meet at a neutral location, a park not far from my house, where we could talk without fear of being overheard. I felt a mix of emotions as I approached the meeting place. Anger, fear, confusion. I was still angry at Emily for everything she had done, and I still didn't fully trust Alex, but I knew we had to set all of that aside if we were going to find out who was behind this. When I arrived at the park, Emily was already there, sitting on a bench, her eyes filled with anxiety. She looked up when she saw me, her expression softening, a small, tentative smile crossing her face. "Hey," she said softly, her voice barely audible. "Hey," I replied, my voice filled with uncertainty. I sat down next to her, the silence between us heavy with unspoken words. We hadn't had a chance to talk about what had happened the night Alex showed up at our door, and I could feel the tension between us, the questions that still lingered. After a few minutes, Alex arrived, his hands in his pockets, his expression serious. He nodded at us, his face filled with a mixture of determination and fear. "Thanks for coming," he said, his voice trembling slightly. I know this is complicated, but we need to figure out who's doing this. I nodded, my heart pounding, the weight of his words pressing down on me. Do you have any idea who it could be? I asked, my voice filled with frustration. Someone who knows all of us. Someone who would have access to our personal lives? Alex hesitated, his eyes narrowing as he thought. There's one person who comes to mind, he said slowly. Someone I met while I was working with the people who hired me to get close to Emily. His name is Marcus. He was the one who made the initial contact, the one who pushed for the details about you, David. But after the whole thing fell apart, I stopped hearing from him. I thought he had moved on to something else, but maybe he didn't. Emily looked at him, her eyes wide, her face filled with fear. Do you think he's behind the messages? She asked, her voice trembling. Do you think he's the one who's been watching us? Alex nodded, his face grim. It's possible. He was always the type to hold a grudge, especially when things didn't go his way. And if he thinks he can get something out of this, he won't stop until he gets it. I felt my stomach turn, my chest tightening with a mix of fear and anger. So what do we do? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. How do we stop him? Alex took a deep breath, his expression determined. I still have his contact information, he said. We could try reaching out to him, try to lure him out, make him think we're willing to play his game. If we can get him to show himself, we can get the proof we need to take to the police. Emily looked at me, her eyes filled with fear. Is that safe? She asked softly, her voice trembling. What if he tries to hurt us? I clenched my jaw, my heart pounding, the weight of her words pressing down on me. I didn't know if it was safe. Didn't know if we were walking into something that could end in disaster. But I also knew that we couldn't keep living like this, couldn't keep looking over our shoulders, wondering when the next message would come. We needed to put an end to it once and for all. We have to do this, Emily, I said finally, my voice filled with determination. We can't let him keep controlling our lives. We need to take back control. She nodded, her tears spilling over, her face filled with a mixture of fear and resolve. Okay, she whispered. Let's do it. Alex made the call, his voice calm as he spoke to Marcus, pretending that he wanted to meet up, that he had information he was willing to share. Marcus took the bait, agreeing to meet at a secluded location later that evening. I could feel my heart pounding as Alex hung up the phone, the reality of what we were about to do sinking in. We arrived at the location, a deserted parking lot on the outskirts of town, just as the sun was setting. My hands were trembling, my chest tight with a mix of fear and anticipation. Emily stood beside me, her eyes wide, her face pale, her hands clasped tightly together. Alex was standing a few feet away, his eyes scanning the area, his expression tense. After what felt like an eternity, a car pulled into the lot, the headlights cutting through the darkness. The car came to a stop, and a man stepped out, tall, with dark hair and a cold, calculating expression. I could tell immediately that this was Marcus, the man who had orchestrated everything, the man who had tried to tear our lives apart. Well, Marcus said, his voice dripping with sarcasm as he walked toward us. I didn't think I'd see you all together. How touching. I clenched my jaw, my heart pounding, the anger bubbling up inside me. Why are you doing this? I demanded, my voice trembling. Why can't you just leave us alone? Marcus smirked, his eyes narrowing as he looked at me. Because I'm not done yet, he said, his voice cold. You see, I didn't get what I wanted the first time around, and I don't like to lose. But you made it easy for me, David. You were so distracted, so busy focusing on your precious career, that you didn't even notice what was happening right in front of you. I took a deep breath, my chest tightening, the weight of his words pressing down on me. You're not going to win, I said, my voice filled with determination. We're not playing your game anymore. Marcus laughed, shaking his head. You think you can stop me? He asked, his voice filled with contempt. You're just a pawn, David. All of you are. Before I could respond, there was a flash of movement behind Marcus. A police officer, his gun drawn, his voice commanding as he shouted for Marcus to put his hands up. My heart pounded, my chest tightening as more officers appeared, surrounding Marcus, their voices echoing through the empty lot. Marcus's face twisted in anger, his eyes narrowing as he looked at me. "This isn't over," he spat, his voice filled with venom. "You'll never be free of this." But as the officers led him away, I felt a sense of relief wash over me. A sense that, for the first time in a long time, we were finally free. The nightmare was over. The man who had tried to tear us apart, who had manipulated us and controlled our lives, was finally being held accountable. As the officers drove away, I turned to Emily, her eyes filled with tears, her face etched with emotion. She looked at me, her voice trembling as she spoke. "David, I know I've made so many mistakes, and I know I've hurt you in ways I can never take back. But I want to be better. I want to fight for us, if you're willing to give me a chance." I looked at her, my heart aching, the weight of everything pressing down on me. I didn't know if I could ever truly forgive her. Didn't know if we could ever find our way back to what we had before. But I also knew that we had faced something far greater than either of us could have imagined, and we had come out the other side, together. "I don't know what the future holds, Emily," I said softly, my voice barely above a whisper. "But I'm willing to try, one day at a time." Her tears spilled over, her face filled with a mixture of hope and sadness. "That's all I want," she whispered. "One day at a time." As we stood there, the darkness of the night surrounding us, I realized that the road ahead was still uncertain. There were still wounds that needed to heal, still trust that needed to be rebuilt. But for now, we were free from the manipulation, free from the fear. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough to give us a chance to start over. Bye-bye.